Yo, what's going on, people? It's your boy Huncho, and this is Cases Season 2, Episode 3, the Rhys Jones case, the 11-year-old boy caught in the crossfire.
There's a young lad been shot.
Okay, how old is he, please?
He's 11. He's on my football team. Oh my God, blood everywhere.
Is he leaving?
No, he's not. Someone's just said they think he's dead.
Rhys Jones, aged 11, was born to parents Stephen and Melanie Jones alongside his brother Owen, and the family lived in the Croxteth Park area of Liverpool, which is roughly 5 miles away from the city centre. Growing up, Rhys was said to have had a strong attachment with his mother and was said to have been extremely popular amongst his peers. If friends would go out to play, Rhys's house would be the first they knocked on because they knew if Rhys would come out, then everybody else would. Growing up in Liverpool's football culture as a child, you'd have to pick either the blue or the red side of the city, and following the steps of Wayne Rooney, who also used to live near to where Rhys Jones lived, he would choose the blue side and was said to have been football mad. Every new kit that came out, Rhys would want it, and when he grew up, he wanted to follow in the footsteps of those Everton footballers that came before him. In the summer holiday of 2007, Rhys had left Broad Square Primary School and was getting ready for his first year at Escalation High School in September, but he'd never get to see those front doors of the secondary school because of an event that had happened on the 22nd of August 2007. But before we get into exactly what happened to Rhys Jones, we've got to rewind back to 2004 where an incident had happened which ultimately led to the incident that Rhys Jones was involved in. road from the peaceful suburb of Croxteth Park, a war was waging out on the streets of Liverpool by two areas that were next to each other in the L11 postcode, which was the old estate of Croxteth and Norris Green. Croxteth is home to the Crocky crew or the Croxteth crew, and Norris Green is home to the Nogger Dogs or the Strang Gang. It's said that the gangs have been around since probably the 90s, and at this moment in time there's conflicting reports on why the gangs had started, but a lot of the reports claim that the areas are deprived neighbourhoods and antisocial teenagers started to form the gangs and in turn started to commit crime, which included burglary, robbery and selling drugs. The rivalry between the two sides was said to have been fairly petty, but that would all change when some more major things had started to happen between both sides. In September of 2003, it's believed that a Strang Gang member or Strang Gang members had planted a bomb in a Peugeot 205 and the bomb exploded at around 11 PM outside of the club 051 in Mount Pleasant, and in retaliation for this it was said that at the time leader of the Croxteth crew, Danny McDonald, had allegedly taken it upon himself to throw a nail bomb into the Dickie Lewis pub on Walton Road in Kirkdale. The bomb itself had been filled with screws and nails, however the fuse on the bomb had fizzled out and in turn the bomb didn't explode. Again, it's unconfirmed whether Danny McDonald was the perpetrator, but a lot of people do believe it was him because on New Year's Day in 2004, around 4 months later, the Croxteth crew versus the Strang Gang feud was about to turn deadly. And in a sense, it'd be this deadly event which would eventually lead to the incident that Rhys Jones was involved in. At around 5 PM on New Year's Day, Danny had been celebrating the New Year with his best friend John Cummings at the Royal Oak pub, which was on Murrayhead Avenue East, a road which bordered the Norris Green and West Derby areas of Liverpool. In the pub, it was also said that there was around 60 other people celebrating the New Year. The pub was packed and out of nowhere, a gunman had entered the building wearing a ski mask and a hood to cover his face. He walked past a number of people straight up to Danny, who was at the bar, and blasted him 4 times at point blank range. He then turned to John and shot him in the abdomen, and the gunman was said to then have fled the scene. Danny had staggered to a nearby doorway and then died at the scene in a pool of his own blood. John had been rushed to Aintree Hospital where he went on to make a full recovery. As the gunman had specifically walked past people and took aim at Danny, along with the theory that Danny was the alleged bomb man in the attempted attack on the pub in September, the police then firmly believed that this shooting was a targeted hit. Just 24 hours after the shooting, bullets were fired at a house in Sovereign Road, Croxteth, in what is thought to have been a revenge attack. 5 people were arrested over the shooting, including high-ranking Strang Gang member Joseph Thompson, and at the time, leader of the Strang Gang, Liam Smigger Smith. These two will become more relevant as the story goes on, but it is firmly believed that Liam Smith was the gunman in this shooting. In 2020 though, no one has been charged in connection with the murder of Danny McDonald. After the murder of Danny, the feud between the two sides really started to ramp up, and for the following 3 years, it was said that 20 reported shootings had happened from either car or mountain bikes, with some standout shootings being in December of 2004, Croxteth crew member Nathan Quinn had been shot in a drive-by shooting which left shotgun pellets in his body. In March of 2005, Liam Smigger Smith, who was the suspect from Danny McDonald's murder, had been shot in an attack which didn't even get reported on at the time and would only be found out because of an incident that had happened 1 year later, which we'll get into when it becomes more relevant, so keep this one in mind. At some point in 2005, beauty pageant queen who had won Miss Bolton and was a Miss England finalist, Vicky Smart from the Croxteth Park estate, had found herself falling in love with Wayne Brady, who was a high leader of the Strang Gang. Now, although Croxteth Park was a nicer suburb down the road from Croxteth, the Croxteth crew still claimed this as their territory, and once both sides found out about the two dating, well, let's just say neither side was happy, to say the least. Wayne Brady had crossed the invisible border that split the two sides on various occasions to meet Vicky in a somewhat dangerous romance, because 2 of the times he was in fact shot at on visits to the area. This romance will become important as the story goes on, and trust me, the romance is what makes this whole story come full circle. In the following year though, the war would still be continuing between both sides, which seen a 15-year-old boy shot in the leg in Norris Green by a gunman on a bicycle, and 2 months later, homes in Norris Green were sprayed with gunfire in drive-by shootings. These are the only talked about incidents around that time, but it is believed that a lot went underreported. Then the war would take another deadly turn on the 23rd of August 2006 after an altercation inside of a prison. Liam Smith, again who was thought to have been the gunman in the murder of Danny McDonald, went to visit a friend at HMP Alt Course in Fairsackilly, Merseyside. Also locked up at the prison was Croxteth crew captain Ryan Lloyd, who had been put on remand for separate firearm offences. The pair had clashed in the past over a mountain bike, and when they seen each other on visitation, they were said to have had a heated exchange. Ryan Lloyd's sisters were currently on the visit, and when the confrontation had happened, it was said that he felt belittled and disrespected, and so he stormed back into his cell. He was heard shouting to a fellow gang member, quick, give us the phone, I'll get the boys up here to pop him." The fellow gang member then was said to have handed over a mobile phone that had been smuggled into jail, and it was here he was said to have phoned up Croxteth crew gang members to carry out the hit on Liam Smith. Around 30 minutes later, Liam would leave the prison, and it was here that Croxteth gang members would ambush him after hiding in bushes near the car park, with a gang member producing a shotgun. The Croxteth crew gang member then shot him in the head at point blank range, leaving Liam dead at the scene. It was said that the Strang gang was that feared in the Norris Green area around this time that when Liam's funeral had taken place, the word on the street was that out of respect, no one was to have shops open and children were forbidden to play out on the streets. Remember how we said that Liam had been shot on a previous occasion but we didn't find out until a later date? Well, that was because after his death it was then only found out when his body had been examined that he had been shot previously. For his murder, 4 Croxteth crew gang members had been jailed. Ryan Lloyd, who made the call, was convicted of murder and jailed to life with a minimum term of 28 years. Thomas Forshaw was convicted of murder and was jailed for life with a minimum term of 20 years. And Sean Farrell, who was just 16 at the time, was also convicted of murder and was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 18 years. Liam Duffy was convicted of manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years but was eligible for parole after 10. The war would still continue, but the next documented event that's out in the public would be in January of 2007, where it was said that shots were fired into Vicky Smart's home by Croxteth crew gang members because she was still dating rival Wayne Brady. The shooting forced her and her family to move to a secret location, and then she parted ways with Wayne. And it was said that she didn't return to the area for the following month, but that was up until the 22nd of August 2007. You see, although they had split up from each other, the pair had still kept in contact, and on this date, Wayne and Vicky, alongside some other Strand gang members, had met up in the car park of the Fair Tree pub on the Croxteth Park estate. And keep this one in mind because this is where the story is about to come full circle. So we now follow 11-year-old schoolboy Rhys Jones, who a few hours before Vicky and Wayne, along with Strand gang members, had met up in the car park, was running late for football practice. Now, the reason he was running late for football practice, for some people that might not be aware of what normally happens, is normally when you go, you take some money with you to pay for the session, and because he had forgot his money, he ran back home. Now, because he had ran back home, time was already running out and his mum decided just to take him in the car. And when they arrived a short while later, Rhys would then give his mum a kiss and he said, "See you mum, I'll be home to watch England," because England were playing Germany later on in the evening. Little did his mum know though that these would be the last words that he would say to her. A short while later, Rhys would finish his football session and would start to make his way home. His coach asked him if he wanted a lift back, but because Rhys didn't live too far, he replied he didn't mind making the trip on foot. But this would prove fatal in the minutes that followed. On his way home, he would have to pass the pub in which ex-couple Vicky Smart and Wayne Brady and Strand gang members were at. But while this was all happening, a Croxteth crew gang member got word that they were there and he was out to get Wayne specifically. Dressed in all black and on a mountain bike, the Croxteth crew gang member had pulled up on the other side of the car park and opened fire attempting to hit Wayne. The first bullet missed and so he opened fire once again. This time Rhys Jones had been caught in the crossfire, and at that point it was believed he had been shot in the neck. Even though an innocent boy who had no connection to the ongoing feud had just been hit, the gunman decided to open fire again, and on the third time, again, no one had been hit. The gunman then fled the scene on his push bike, and a number of people were said to have rushed over to help Rhys, and when they initially reached him, it was believed at that point he was still alive. His football coach, who had just offered him a lift not too long ago, then seen the commotion happening at the pub as he was driving by, and he got out to see what was happening. When he noticed Rhys had been shot, He dialed for emergency services, and soon after he wanted to get in contact with his mum, but because he didn't have his mum's number, he got in contact with his other coach who did have his mum's number, and in turn he rang Rhys's mum, and then Rhys's mum showed up to the scene. This is her first-hand account of what she witnessed when she arrived by Rhys's side.
When you got there, nothing could have prepared me for what happened, what was there. The hundreds of people and the police, and it was just horrendous. I just jumped out the car. There was all people in a circle, and as I just got through the circle, Rhys was just on the floor, and he was just lying there in a pool of blood, his eyes wide open. I knew he'd gone. But I just got hold of him and I was just saying to him, just stay with me. You'll be okay. But it wasn't. The paramedic said to me he was still alive, but I don't know, he was trying to resuscitate and doing his heart. But I knew looking at him, his eyes were wide open. There was blood pouring from his mouth. He was just lying there in a pool of blood. I knew he'd gone, although I was holding him and shaking him and telling him to wake up and it'll be all right.
Rhys was eventually rushed to hospital where he was in a critical condition and sadly went on to die a short while later. The killing had shocked the whole nation, and you want to believe the whole nation wanted those responsible brought to justice, but the investigation was going to prove a difficult one because of the wall of silence the police would face when trying to investigate the murder. In the first 24 hours, the police came up with nothing, no forensic evidence, no bullets were found at the scene, and the CCTV of the incident was extremely poor. What the police did get though was witness statements which did describe the shooting, and they went on to explain that a hooded youth rode upon a bicycle and shot in the direction of a group of people across the other side of the pub car park. Either way though, because no arrests had been made, Rhys's parents decided to put an appeal out for information for people to come forward.
We're devastated. We've lost our world. The world's lost a good guy.
My baby was only 11. He didn't deserve this. The only reason we're here today, the only reason is because we need help. We need witnesses to come forward. We need the person who killed our son to be caught and brought to justice. And if their parents had any thought about our pain and what we've lost, they turn in their son, or their sister, or their auntie, or someone must know who it is, or they must suspect who it is.
Very soon after the shooting, word was getting around Liverpool that this shooting was the result of gang violence, and in turn this meant that people were reluctant to come forward with names because they feared the repercussions of doing so. And because of this, the police then decided to set up an anonymous hotline for people to call in. The police would go on to say they received hundreds of calls, but one name kept flagging up, and that was a notorious 16-year-old boy, a member of the Crossfire crew, Sean Mercer, who up until that point was said not to have had that bad of a criminal record, but had been stopped and searched by police 80 times. So the police decided to arrest members of the Crossfire crew, including Sean, and bring them in for questioning. When the gang members were getting arrested at their home addresses, police would also go on to put bugging devices in some of the houses of those arrested, which would prove vital when the trial would eventually go ahead. During these interviews, Sean had prepared a statement which was given to his solicitor, and in turn the solicitor gave to the police, and that was to say that he was a fellow Crossfire crew gang member in Dean Kelly's house at the time of the murder. And he stuck to this alibi throughout the whole time while he was under investigation, and the solicitor would go on to say he wouldn't be speaking to the police any further and he would be sticking to this statement. After the gang were questioned, they were released pending further inquiries because the police had nothing solid to go off. Either way though, the police put appeals out to the public claiming that they needed help to find those who had murdered Rhys, and described the murder weapon as a black handgun with a long barrel. Rhys's family also put out further appeals when they appeared at Goodison Park, and on the 28th of August 2007, their family went down to Anfield, of course local rivals to Liverpool, because Liverpool were playing in a European match, and there was a massive tribute paid in respect to Rhys Jones before the game, where they played Everton's Z-Cars in front of the crowd.
Shot and murdered whilst returning home from playing football. Rhys was an avid Everton fan, and he loved his club and playing football in equal measure. On pitch side tonight, we welcome Rhys's mum Melanie, dad Stephen, older brother Owen, who are our guests this evening, along with other members of the family in our stand. We are going to play the Z Cars theme as a mark of our respect and in remembrance of Rhys, and to demonstrate that all football fans are united in their sadness. The family has said that the thought of Z Cars being played at Anfield would have really made Rhys smile. In memory of Rhys Jones, Z Cars.
Around a month later, and with no luck moving forward in the investigation, Rhys's parents would put a further appeal out for witnesses on BBC's Crime Watch, and it was here that Rhys's mother made a direct appeal to the mother of the murderer to hand their son in. In this episode of Crime Watch, CCTV footage was also shown in the bids to make people come forward. The appeal proved well as it led to 12 people calling into the show, all who gave the police the same name, and that would be none other than 16-year-old Sean Mercer, whose name had been doing the rounds anyway. Around this time, it was extremely frightening for the residents who lived on the local estates though, and for many families they kept inside the house when they could because they feared for their own lives and their children's lives. Up until this point, a total of 18 people, which included males and females aged between 14 and 24, were arrested, which included Croxteth gang members, but no one had been charged. Behind the scenes though, the police were working around the clock trying to bring those responsible to justice, and they were getting ever more closer to doing it. In February the following year, which would now mean we're in 2008, no one had still been charged over Rhys's murder, but leading detective Superintendent Dave Kelly, who was leading the investigation, had came out to tell the BBC, "We have a clear strategy for this investigation, and we're determined to leave no stone unturned. We're confident with the progress we're making, and that we'll be able to progress towards changes and a successful prosecution, the timescale for which will be governed by the evidence." He added the public provided them with a lot of information, but their focus remains on building a case that could go to court. In February of 2008, the police would also go on to claim that they seized 108 guns off the streets of Liverpool since Rhys Jones had been murdered, one of which they believe was the murder weapon. Forensic testing was still ongoing though, so they didn't reveal what kind of firearm it was at that point, and on the same report, Detective Superintendent Dave Kelly said he was keen to trace anyone who saw the gunman on a silver Specialized hard rock mountain bike on the night of the killing, and then went on to release a picture of the bike. Up until this point now, 20 people had been arrested in connection to the incident, 17 of them on suspicion of murder, but still no one had been charged. Of course, the police knew that Sean Mercer's name was on everyone's tongue at this point, and Detective Superintendent Dave Kelly said that the police are aware of the speculation of the killer's identity within the community, but he said that the police are dealing with evidence rather than a rumour, making sure that when they do eventually charge someone, they get the right person. In a report on the 21st of February 2008, this is the earliest report I can find where the news had started to speculate that Rhys had been caught in the crossfire between the two rival gangs, that being the Croxteth crew and the Strang gang. And so at this point, I'm assuming that the nation would have started to speculate that this was the case, as there was heavy indications that it was, and of course the people in the local areas knew that this was the exact reason anyway. On the 15th of April 2008, around 8 months after Rhys's death, police went on to arrest 12 people in connection with the incident in early morning raids, which included Croxteth crew members Sean Mercer, James Yates, Nathan Quinn, Gary Kays, Melvin Coy, Dean Kelly and Boy M, who can't be named even now because of legal reasons. After this, the police finally went on to charge Sean Mercer with murder. James Yates was charged with possession of a firearm, and he, alongside the others who were arrested, were charged with assisting an offender, whilst everyone else had the charges dropped against them. In regards to the people that had been charged though for their roles in Rhys's murder, Detective Superintendent Dave Kelly said, "We have brought significant charges today. It has been a complicated inquiry which is reflected in the number of charges today. I would personally like to thank Stephen and Melanie Jones for their support and patience throughout this investigation. They have showed courage, strength and dignity during what must have been a truly terrible time for them." So after pleading not guilty to the charges that were brought against them, a trial was to go ahead in October of 2008. In court, it was heard that Rhys Jones was an innocent victim who was caught in between a violent gang feud when he was shot dead in the car park on that fateful evening back in August of 2007. Prosecutor Neil Flewitt QC said that Rhys had walked across the car park and a hooded gunman on a bicycle came from behind the pub and fired 3 shots. A 3-second clip was then played to the court which shows the gunman, who's alleged to have been Sean Mercer, stopping on his bike, firing a Smith & Wesson .455 revolver and then riding off. The footage showed Rhys crossing the car park and becoming distracted by the sound of the first bullet, which went through the windows of a BMW and struck a metal container nearby. As he turned to look in the direction of the noise, he was then struck by what the prosecution say was the second bullet fired by the gunman. The images then showed Rhys fall to the ground, and then the third bullet impacted a stone wall, which the CCTV footage showed that it threw up a small dust cloud. After Rhys was shot, the court heard he was rushed to Alder Hey Children's Hospital where he was examined. He had no pulse and attempts to resuscitate him had failed. Pathologist Dr. Paul Johnson said although it's thought that Rhys was shot in the neck, in fact he was shot in the back slightly above his left shoulder blade, and the bullet then exited from the front right side of his neck. Prosecutor Neil Flewitt QC said a similar wound was created in scientific tests where they used the .455 Smith & Wesson believed to be involved in the shooting, and they used 3 of the .45 Colt cartridges that they recovered with the weapon. He went on to say that tests revealed the bullets produced the same distinctive keyhole effect that the forensic scientists had identified on Rhys Jones's football shirt. He said the unusual wound was the result of the bullet tumbling nose over base in flight rather than flying nose first in a stabilized manner. A bullet tumbling in this way is usually due to an undersized bullet or one discharged from a gun with a smooth bore barrel or from a barrel with worn rifling. According to the scientist, the tumbling bullet that killed Rhys was undersized by 0.08mm and the rifling of the revolver was worn. The prosecution continued that the alleged gunman Sean Mercer had not intended to shoot Rhys Jones, but it was the prosecution's case that he did in fact fire the fatal shot and therefore was guilty of murder. They also said that immediately after the shooting, Sean Mercer was said to have tried to distance himself from it, which the prosecution would go on to describe as Sean quickly disposing of his clothes, his bike, the gun he had used, and it was also said that he gave himself a petrol bath with the help of other Crockstuff crew gang members. Going into a brief history between the rivalry between the Crockstuff crew and the Strang gang, the prosecution would go on to tell the court that since 2004 there have been at least 70 incidents between the two groups, which included criminal damage and tit-for-tat shootings, adding again Rhys Jones wasn't the intended target, rather it was the 3 members from the rival gang who had been in Crockstuff crew territory, which included, like we've already mentioned, Wayne Brady, Vicky Smart and Wayne Brady's cousin Kevin Davis alongside another person. The prosecution said that Sean Mercer's interest in Wayne Brady wasn't just limited to general gang rivalry, instead evidence suggested that the two had some personal animosity between them, adding that a witness who knew Sean had gone to the police with information because Sean had said to her that quote-unquote Brady's gonna get it. Although at a further court date, the person did go on to deny this and said that Sean had said this, but it was years ago and he was winding her up. It was heard in court that Dean Kelly had told police officers that he was watching a DVD about rapper 50 Cent with Sean Mercer when Rhys was gunned down, which backed up Sean's original written statement which he gave to the police when he was initially brought in for questioning. When Dean was interviewed 3 days after the murder, he told police that Sean arrived at his house between 6:30 and 7 p.m, adding that Sean stayed there between 8 to 8:30 p.m, and with Rhys being shot at around 7:30 p.m, according to Dean, this meant that he couldn't have been at the shooting because he was at his. The interviewing officer asked Dean in interviews, is there anything you did or anywhere you went that we can take the time from you? Did you make a phone call, because you've been very specific about the time he arrived and the time he left? Dean replied no, before adding that he had his mobile with him, and that's how he knew what time it was. In court, it was heard that the grandmother of Boy M, who was currently on trial, was said to have told police that she was at her daughter's house on the day of Rhys Jones' murder up until around 10:30 p.m. Of course, this would also be Boy M's address. She went on to claim that Sean arrived at the house after the shooting, and even went on to say it was her who had answered the door to him. She admitted that Boy M and his mother were at the house when she was there, and when asked if any other visitors came round, she replied there was Mercer, Yatesy and Nathan, in reference to Sean Mercer, James Yates and Nathan Quinn, who were currently on trial. She went on to say Mercer called first and Yates and Quinn called 10 minutes later. They came together. It was around 7:30 p.m. I was in the living room. My daughter was having a bath and my husband was downstairs watching the football, and my grandson was in his bedroom. She said that Sean Mercer had knocked on the door as she sat in a chair by the window, and she answered to be greeted by Sean Mercer, who had asked her if Boy M was at home. She added he bought his bike and then asked me, are you alright? And then he left the bike in the hall. She said that she also opened the door to James Yates and Nathan Quinn, and they had also asked if Boy M was there, saying they came in and left about 10 minutes later, and she went on to say they got into a khaki brown people carrier which had a Jack Russell sitting in the front. The prosecution showed CCTV footage of a Ford Galaxy which was said to have been that khaki brown people carrier, and that Ford Galaxy was said to have left Boy M's house with some of the gang members in. It was then said to have took Sean to an industrial estate owned by Melvin Coy, who was also on trial. At this industrial unit, it's believed that here evidence was destroyed, but we'll get more into that as the trial goes on. It was heard that a bug had been placed in Boy M's home, and several recordings had been played which were recorded after Boy M and his family members had given police statements. In the recording, a male voice, alleged by the prosecution to be that of Sean Mercer, can be heard demanding that Boy M's grandmother change a story about the day Sean had visited the house, because if you remember, her original statement was that Sean Mercer did in fact turn up after the shooting. In one recording, a voice says to the grandmother, you have to say it was Tuesday. When the grandmother refuses to comply, the male voice becomes more insistent, saying, you better change it, fucking hell, why can't you just say that you've got a bad memory? Why can't you just forget about it then? It was Tuesday. Or you need to say it was Tuesday and me mind's gone. During the tape recording, the grandmother was heard repeatedly standing her ground, insisting that the event she described to the police had happened on the Wednesday, which was the day of Rhys's shooting, and she was not prepared to change her statement. Another bugged conversation at Boy M's house, which was said to have been between Boy M and his grandmother, was also played to the court. In the audio clip, Boy M could be heard telling his grandmother to change her story, to which she replied, it's 3 against 1, isn't it? Your mum, me and your granddad, because we told them that they were here on the Wednesday. Boy M then replied, but they weren't, they were here on the Tuesday, to which the grandmother replied, they weren't, they were here on the Wednesday, and then Boy M is heard saying, well, you best say it was Tuesday anyway. The grandmother then replies at some point later saying, I'm not changing, I've signed the police statement, leave me alone, I'm sick. Boy M had an interview on the 16th of April 2008, which was the day when everyone went on to be charged for their roles in Rhys's murder. And in this interview, Boy M was said to have admitted that Sean Mercer did in fact turn up at his house just after the shooting. Police pressure was more than likely against him at this point, with all the evidence that they more than likely brought to the table, so he probably caved in. In that interview, he told officers, I got a knock, my nan opened the door and Mercer came up and he said, I just shot at someone and I seen a kid go down. He went on to say, then he rang Gary Kays and told him what had happened. He was saying, I've shot a lad and he went down, can you tell me what has happened to him? He then said, get rid of these for me, which was a hat and gloves. Yatesy and Nathan then came round and we had a spliff, and then the taxi comes with Boy X. In regards to Boy X, his role will be talked about as the trial goes on, so just bear him in mind. Boy M continued, Sean Mercer said he was on the Stand farm, said he was shooting at lads, don't know who, and he seen a kid go down. He was distraught. He was just like panicking. He didn't look right at all. Do you know what I mean? Don't know if he was upset because of what he'd done or because he would be in trouble. Boy M said that he was scared of what would happen to him after he talked to police because, in his own words, he said, "I've just more or less grassed," and also had asked police to move him to America. He did tell police though that he wanted to come forward with information earlier, but he was scared of getting beaten up because it had happened to him before. Boy M's mother gave evidence in court, and she went on to explain in more detail about her son being bullied by the gang, and that Sean Mercer hadn't been to a house for around 4 months, but then had turned up out of nowhere after he allegedly had murdered Rhys. In regards to Sean turning up to a house, she did go on to admit that this was true, and then James Yates and Nathan Quinn soon followed. She said that Boy M had been diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 11 and was used as a tag-along to the gang. His mother went on to say, "I told him to stay away from them, but he didn't take any notice," adding, "He would go on to say things without thinking and do things without thinking." The court heard from Boy M's mum that he was afraid of being called a grass because he in fact had been beaten up by the Croxteth crew back in 2006 when he came forward to police with information in relation to a shooting. She went on to say that her son had become distant after he had been beaten up and didn't leave the house for 2 years. At a further court date, it was heard that the satin silver Specialized hard rock mountain bike, which is believed to be the bike used in the killing, was found dumped the day after the murder had taken place and was handed into police 6 months later following an appeal, and it said that the bike can be linked directly to Sean Mercer. Leslie Shimin had saw the bike on the appeal and realised he had found the bike frame the day after the murder had taken place. He found it while cycling with his sons at less than 250 metres from that industrial unit we was talking about earlier, which was owned by Melvin Coy. The prosecution went on to explain that an insurance company had supplied Sean Mercer with a Specialized hard rock mountain bike in April of 2006 after his previous bike had been stolen. The serial number of the bike that was given to Sean matched the serial number of the silver Specialized hard rock mountain bike found by Leslie, and DNA swabs taken from Sean matched DNA from the discovered bike frame. The industrial unit was said to have been visited by Sean Mercer and other members of the Croxteth crew hours after Rhys's murder. Whilst in the unit, it was said that Sean Mercer destroyed evidence and washed himself down with petrol to get rid of any gunshot residue. The court then heard that on the 11th of September 2007, 3 empty petrol cans were recovered by police from the industrial unit, which backed up the claim that Sean Mercer did in fact wash himself down with petrol. The court had been told of a third lesser known gang called the Stand Farm Heads gang, which was actually based in Rhys Jones's area of Croxteth Park. A girl who was at the Fair Tree pub at the time of the shooting told the court how at first Wayne Brady's cousin Kevin Davis thought Rhys had been a part of the Stand Farm Heads gang because she said she heard Wayne Brady's cousin shout, "It's about time one of you Stand Farm Heads got shot." The sister of the girl who was given evidence in court was said to have shouted back, "It's only a kid, you're out of order, it's your fault, if you lot weren't down here this wouldn't have happened." Asked what was meant by her sister's comment, she said obviously they were the target, they were from Norris Green. Wayne Brady gave evidence in court and explained that he was with his cousin Kevin along with another boy who went to meet Vicky Smart to apologise for some things. It was said that his friends had waited for him by a container near to the pub while he spoke to her. He went on to tell the court, "I heard gunshots, 3, it sounded like 3. He said he could tell the direction they were coming from, but not exactly where, adding that his friends had dropped their heads down and pedalled as fast as they could away from the pub to the shops. In regards to himself, he said that he got off straight away and went the opposite direction from where the shots sounded like they were coming from. The prosecution said, "When did you first find out the little boy had been shot?" Wayne replied that Vicky soon pulled up and told him that a kid was lying dead on the floor, so he abandoned his bike, went to a friend's house that was nearby, and was then driven back to Norris Green. At a further court date, it was time for the prosecution's star witness to take the stand, only known as Boy X, who we previously spoke about. He wasn't a part of the Croxteth crew, but he was known to them. He's known as Boy X, as his identity has to be hidden for the safety of himself and his family for giving evidence for the prosecution in court. On a quick side note, Boy X was given full immunity for helping the prosecution and was put under the witness protection program, where he now goes by a new name. It was heard before Boy X was given his immunity though, he was in fact charged with firearms offences, but then he was offered full immunity because his account would be key to bring Sean Mercer and the Croxteth crew to be charged with the offences and hopefully see Sean Mercer get found guilty for murder. 20 minutes after the shooting, Boy X would explain that he received a phone call from Sean Mercer and was asked to meet him at Boy M's house. When he arrived, he explained that he was forced by Sean Mercer into hiding the gun that was used in the murder, but he claims he didn't know it had been the gun involved in the shooting. The gun was said to have been wrapped up in a red and white carrier bag and then was put under blankets in the dog kennel of Boy X's home. Later on that night, Boy X had been on MSN chat rooms, and it was here he heard about the shooting of Rhys Jones. At that point, he said he realised that he might have been concealing the murder weapon. He went on to say, "I started putting things together. I was thinking that he's given me the gun, and I wondered if he had fired at them because they're from Norris Green and he'd missed or something." He was asked why Sean Mercer chose him to hide the weapon, and he responded, "I thought they used me as a safe house or something because I've never been in trouble with the police and I don't really go out. I think they thought, well, we'll use him because the police won't have a clue where it is." Boy X said he was too scared to refuse demands, adding, "I was just scared to say no because you think to yourself, well, he's just done that to a little kid, so what could he do to me? He's not going to think twice like." 5 days after the killing, Dean Kelly came to Boy X's home address and hid the murder weapon in the loft of the house. 5 weeks after the murder, Boy X and his family went on holiday to Florida. During this time, police raided his home and Sean Mercer phoned him to tell him what was happening while he was watching a dolphin show at SeaWorld with his family. The reason Boy X's home address had been raided and searched, even though not originally a suspect, was the fact that a bugging device had been placed in James Yates's home and it revealed a new lead to where the murder weapon was. The conversation picked up on the device in regards to the murder weapon was a conversation between Francis Yates, James's father, and he was talking with Marie Yates, James's mother, and he was recounting a conversation that he had with James. Francis Yates would go on to say, "But I think our James went with him to dump the stuff and douse him in petrol. I said, well, you know this fucking gun that's in this fucking lad's house? What if his house gets fucking raided?" James was said to have replied to his father, "Well, it'll never get raided." Francis then went on to say, "Well, what if it does?" And then James said, "Well, they'll just search his room." And it was these recordings which gave police a major new lead 5 weeks after the murder of Rhys Jones, and in turn they ended up narrowing their search down to Boy X's home address. After the initial raid of Boy X's home address, Sean Mercer was said to have rang him multiple times, but Boy X said that he was too scared to answer. Police found the murder weapon at Boy X's home address and another gun which was a converted imitation Walther PPK blank cartridge self-loading pistol along with ammunition hidden in carrier bags in the loft. Some ammunition that was found was too small to fit the revolver, which went hand in hand with what the prosecution had said in regards to the shooting itself, because if you remember, the distinctive keyhole effect that the bullets had left in Rhys Jones's football shirt was that of bullets that were too small for the gun. The search was carried out by Merseyside police, and in a statement from PC Mark Gibbs read to the jury via the prosecution, the statement went on to say, "I noticed a red and white plastic bag in the far end of the wall. I pulled the bag back and noticed it contained something. I saw a black revolver and a semi-automatic pistol." On October the 6th, 2007, Boy X and his family had touched back down in the UK from their holiday, and when they landed in Manchester Airport, he went on to be arrested. Boy X was interviewed 12 times over 3 days and gave his full account, some of which we've been over, into how he came to have the firearms and ammunition in his possession. Boy X was cross-examined in court, and he was asked, "If you refused Sean Mercer's demands, I would imagine you would have faced serious retribution," which Boy X responded, "Yes, sir." He was then asked, "Sean Mercer told you what to do. You were not given a choice, were you?" Boy X replied, "No, sir." It was also heard in court that although the guns were found and it did look like they were linked to the murder, a weapon expert claimed that there was a possibility that the gun recovered by police wasn't the actual firearm that killed Rhys Jones. Firearm specialist Angela Shaw told Liverpool Crown Court that there was insufficient evidence to be certain which gun killed Rhys. She said 2 types of firearms discharge residue were left at the murder scene, but only 1 type was found inside the recovered gun. Miss Shaw was given the role of examining the firearms discharge residue at the murder scene, which are tiny particles which are created when a bullet is propelled from a gun. Given evidence, she said she found 1 type of firearms discharge residue, referred to as type 1 in court, on shattered glass from the BMW, and a second type, referred to as type 2, on the England shirt Rhys was wearing when he was killed. However, swabs on the barrel and the cartridge of the Smith & Wesson gun recovered by police found only particles on type 2 from inside the weapon. She added their expectation would be that both type 1 and type 2 would be found. She was then asked if it was possible that the police had recovered the wrong gun, and she replied that it could have definitely been a possibility. The jury also heard evidence from Andrew Laws, a forensic imagery consultant who compared CCTV images of the gunman's bike frame to the frame of Sean Mercer's bike recovered by the member of the public. Andrew Law told the court that there were some differences and was not able to say if the frame was the bicycle in the CCTV footage, adding the images tend to suggest that the bicycle in the CCTV and recovered frame are not the same make and model. So with a lot of people on trial being up for assisting an offender, you might be asking yourself, well, what was their role in Rhys Jones's murder? In regards to Melvin Coy, he was said to have alerted Sean Mercer to the presence of the rivals in the area. At around 6:40 PM, he phoned Sean, who was in a shop in Croxteth. After the shooting, Melvin was said to have drove Sean in that Ford Galaxy to nearby Kirkby to his industrial unit, and here they destroyed evidence which we previously spoken about. He gave evidence in court and claimed his recollection of the evening was poor, and admitted driving to the unit but only to collect car parts with Gary Kays, but went on to say he didn't know how long they were there or what they did when they got there. He did go on to admit though that he had spoken to Sean 50 minutes before the shooting, which had contradicted Sean's claim about losing his mobile phone the weekend prior. In regards to James Yates, he was said to have brought the murder weapon 3 years before Rhys was shot. He was said to have given it to Sean Mercer after Melvin Coy had given the tip-off about the presence of the Strang Gang members in their territory. In a bugged recording from James's property, he's heard talking to his dad in the front room of his house about his confidence that Sean Mercer would never give him up to police. In the conversation, James said, "There's one lad on a bike who's the gunman, so there's one lad who's going to get the blame for shooting him, and they're going to try and blame someone for giving him the gun. Do you think Sean's gonna sit there and say, James Yates gave me the gun? No, end of story. I bought that gun 3 years ago, end of story. What can they prove? Nothing. Can they, Dad?" In the days leading up to his arrest, he would spend his days waking up at midday and smoking cannabis. When police finally came to arrest him in April of 2008, he was said to have jumped from the first floor window of his girlfriend's home. He was also said to have helped Sean Mercer destroy his clothes. The court was told that while on remand, James Yates had been moved from a normal prison wing after being there for 15 minutes because inmates were screaming baby killer at him and he believed that he had a big target on his back. Gary Kays was said to have helped Melvin Coy take Sean Mercer to the industrial estate in Kirkby. Gary had been working for his father's firm earning £2,000 a month and denied he was a part of the Croxteth crew, adding that there was nothing odd or sinister in his friendship with teenage gang members. He said they were friends because they shared the love of off-road biking and getting high on drugs, not because they were a gang. Nathan Quinn was alleged to have helped Sean Mercer destroy evidence and helped out in the industrial unit just like a lot of the other gang members. When he appeared in court, he was already serving a 5-year jail sentence in relation to a separate firearms offence. Then, after a 9-week trial on the 16th of December 2008, the jury found all guilty on charges that were brought against them. As James Yates was getting his verdict read to him, he was said to have spoken out loudly to the court and said, "All this for a fucking kid." Sean Mercer was then sentenced to life with a minimum term of 22 years, and at the same hearing, Melvin Coy and Gary Kays were sentenced to 7 years for assisting an offender. It wouldn't be until January of 2009 that the others would be sentenced for their roles. James Yates was sentenced to 7 years, Dean Kelly was sentenced to 4 years, Nathan Quinn was sentenced to 2 years, and Boy M was given a supervision order. So if you're familiar with this cases series, then you'll know normally everyone gets sentenced and then that's the end of the story, but trust me, this story, believe it or not, runs all the way up until 2020, and it continues a short while later with the parents of James Yates and Sean Mercer's mother. You see, because of the bug that was placed in the home of James Yates, it showed that his parents were attempting to pervert the course of justice. There was a bugged conversation from the property in the early hours of the 27th of August 2007, and here it showed that Francis Yates, James's father, was going to try and give Sean Mercer a false alibi, and it also showed that his mother and father both tried to burn the SIM card that could have linked James to the murder, and so in turn they was destroying evidence. When they were eventually charged, they both pleaded not guilty to the charges brought against them, but on the day of the trial they ended up pleading guilty. They were both sentenced to 18 months for destroying the SIM card, and Francis was handed an extra 3 years to run consecutively for trying to create a false alibi. Jeanette Mercer, Sean's mother, also appeared in court on the same day as Francis and Marie, where she was charged with perverting the course of justice after she admitted to lying to police during the murder investigation because, of course, she didn't want her son to get in trouble with the police. The court heard how she supported the false claim that Sean wasn't the owner of the bike that was used in the shooting, and Judge Henry Globe told Jeanette Mercer at the hearing, "Your son was a key suspect in the murder, and you knew he had told a pack of lies. You backed him up and you told more lies." She was then sentenced to 3 years. There was also another person named James Hughes, and he was was jailed for 6 months for lying to police about boy M's whereabouts when Rhys was killed. Now, I know I didn't mention him throughout the trial or anything like that, and the only reports or the only information that's out there about him is literally that he was lying about boy M's whereabouts and he was handed a 6-month jail sentence. After the original sentencing of James Yates, Rhys's parents would go on to say that they were disgusted at the 7-year sentence given to him, going on to say, in our minds, he's the one who provided the gun that killed our son. And so in October of 2009, James Yates would see himself at an appeal hearing because the prosecution felt the sentence was too lenient. The appeal court would agree and add an extra 5 years onto his sentence, which would mean he'd now be sentenced to 12 years in prison. A month on from this, in November of 2009, Sean Mercer would be back in the news after it was said he assaulted 19-year-old Jake Farey in the exercise yard of HMP Moorland in Doncaster. At the time, Jake was seen as the top dog, so to say, in the prison, and he was serving a 14-year jail sentence for murdering 16-year-old Jimmy Mitson in an unprovoked attack in a bakery in Lee, southeast London. During the attack, it was said that Sean had attacked Jake with a pair of tweezers which had been sharpened and bound with tape to make a makeshift knife. The incident was also said to have involved a third person who held Jake down during the attack, and the attack caused a deep wound which was said to have narrowly missed Jake's spine. Following the attack, Sean had been moved to an isolation wing at the prison, and it was reported that even before this attack, he had spent a number of weeks in the segregation unit after previous clashes with prison officers and governors at the prison. By the time 2017 came around, Sean had been moved from Moorland Young Offenders Institute to Franklin Prison, and around this time ITV would air their drama Little Boy Blue, which covered this whole case. When Sean got wind that this was coming out, it was reported that he was bragging about the stabbing of Jake as he feared for his life, as the prison was home to some of the toughest prisoners in the country. So Sean wanted everyone in the prison to know that he wasn't scared of no one and could walk the walk if need be. Now, if you cast your minds back to the start of the video, we mentioned Joseph Thompson, who was a suspect in the 2004 New Year's Day shooting of Croxteth leader Danny McDonald. Well, in June of 2012, around 1 AM, he and his friend 27-year-old Kevin Murray were on Ravensthorpe Green when out of nowhere, a shower of gunshots were fired towards the pair. Kevin survived the attack after being shot multiple times in his torso, but the same couldn't be said for Joseph, and he went on to die at the scene. 4 men went on to be arrested on suspicion of murder, but even in 2020, no one has been charged over the murder of Joseph Thompson, but it is firmly believed by police that Joseph's death is the result of a dispute within his own gang, that being the Strang Gang. Today, police are still on the hunt for a Citroen C4 that was seen driving around the area, and a £20,000 reward was offered in 2014 for information leading to the identification, arrest and conviction of the gunman. In 2020, I'm unsure if this reward is still there. In 2013, older members and leaders of the Croxteth crew, including head Huncho, 23-year-old Anthony Jewell, were sentenced to a total of 113 years between them after they carried out a terror campaign of shootings and firebombings, all aimed at either former associates or their rival gangs. It was said that in order to enforce their dominance on the streets of Liverpool, the gang collected an arsenal of weapons including several pistols and a double-barrel shotgun. The gang also made petrol bombs out of Lucasade bottles filled with white spirit. To get to and from attacks quickly and to avoid police patrols also, they used non-road legal scrambler bikes, and at the same time would be dealing drugs around their turf on Stonedale Crescent and Mossway shops. In regards to the attacks themselves, it was said that the gang were responsible for 6 separate incidents in which firearms were discharged in the street. One of the shootings included a drive-by shooting on a young man suspected to be a part of the Strang Gang. Another was an alleged punishment shooting of Josh Keating, a former associate who was kneecapped. 2 more shootings were said to have taken place when shots were fired at Josh Fitzsimmons, who was chased by the gang, but their guns had misfired on both occasions. Taxi driver Joel Garrity, who was also a drug dealer, was shot at, but made a lucky escape when the gun malfunctioned twice. The gang had also been involved in several arson attacks on the families of their rivals, but I can't find any reports that talk about these into detail. Over this conspiracy case, leader of the Croxteth crew, Anthony Jewell, was sentenced to 20 years plus 5 years on licence. Mark Thomas was jailed for 16 years plus 4 years on licence. Ryan Holden was jailed for 13 years plus 4 years on licence. Barry Burke was jailed for 12 years plus 4 years on licence. Carl Smith was jailed for 12 years plus 3 years on licence. Sam Hughes was jailed for 12 years plus 3 years on licence, and Sean Bryan was sentenced to 6 years detention. In 2014, James Yates was released from jail on licence, which was described as horrendous by Rhys's parents, and they would go on to describe him as the worst out of the lot, adding he may have not pulled the trigger, but he was minding the gun. For us, Yates is the most evil out of all of them. He makes my skin crawl. Also in 2014, Melvin Coy would see himself back in the news after he had been arrested for handling a stolen car fitted with a tracking device by police. It was believed that the National Farmers Union Mutual Insurance loaned Merseyside Police a £4,000 Land Rover Defender fitted with the tracking device as part of a police operation. The car had been parked up, and within a few hours it had been stolen. When the police eventually tracked it down, they found Melvin along with 2 other men, Anthony White and Liam Norkett, in the car. Melvin Coy and Anthony White were jailed for 12 months, and Liam Norkett was given a 9-month suspended sentence for 2 years, with 12 months supervision and 150 hours of unpaid work. In 2015, James Yates was recalled to prison after he was charged in relation to him being a supplier in an alleged heroin ring in Dundee, Scotland, and he was also accused of using threats to 2 people by the names of Leanne McCabe and David Milne between June 9th and June 15th, 2015. He did this by allegedly sending them text messages and making repeated phone calls threatening them with violence, saying he was going to set their home on fire. James was also alleged to have robbed Alistair Anderson on the 19th of August 2015 by grabbing him, brandishing a knife at him, punching him in the head, threatening him and stealing a mobile phone, £70 in cash and an alarm fob. Dean Kelly was also accused of being a supplier in this drugs ring. He was initially bailed but was arrested soon after and kept on remand until their court date. Prior to the trial date, prosecutors were granted arrest warrants for a string of witnesses to compel them to take part in an identity parade. However, none of the witnesses detained by police were willing to identify James Yates or Dean Kelly as being responsible, and in 2017 Yates and Kelly were cleared of any involvement. Dean Kelly was allowed to walk free, but it was heard that James Yates would have to serve his full sentence, which would have ran up until this year, that being 2020. However, in 2018 he would make an appeal and was let out after they decided he was not a threat to society anymore. 1 year later, at the end of 2019, James would see himself back in jail because he breached his licence conditions, but at this current time it isn't exactly reported what happened, and it's now believed he'll serve the rest of his time in jail, which will more than likely see him released over the next few months, where he'll be completely free of the legal system. Also in 2019, Sean Mercer would end up in the news after it surfaced that he'd become one of the most feared prisoners in HMP Franklin, a drastic change from the few years prior, seeing as he was almost fearing for his life after the Little Boy Blue drama series was about to air. Around 2019 though, it was reported that he was the boss of a violent gang in the prison which controlled the distribution of spice, cannabis, cocaine and heroin. It was also said that he and his prison gang were in control of contraband such as mobile phones and prison hooch. It was said that Mercer was the drugs kingpin inside Franklin, where he controls the trade through fear but never gets his hands dirty. It was said he has a network of people working for him on both inside and outside of jail, and he's said to be making lots of money. It was said in jail though he was enjoying life, going to the gym every day, and it was said he enjoys cooking, and it's even said that he was studying for an open university degree. In May 2020, Sean Mercer would find himself in the news once again. This time a picture of him surfaced online, and it was heard he'd been caught with a phone in jail. In regards to the picture though, it was the first time anyone had seen him of recent, with the last picture in everyone's mind being the mugshot back when he was charged with the murder of Rhys Jones. But how did this picture start to surface online, you might be asking yourself? Well, the now 29-year-old was said to have had a phone which was smuggled into jail, and he was messaging a woman he met online. He had met the woman in August of 2019 after liking one of her comments on Instagram. He told the woman during their 8-month relationship that he had aspirations of becoming a father to 1 or 2 children once he was released from prison. Now, what some of you might not understand is that despite being handed a minimum term of 22 years in jail, Sean Mercer can actually apply for a review to see if he can be released from prison because he was sentenced as a minor, and if this appeal gets rejected, he can do this every 2 years up until, of course, the full sentence is served. But the recent revelation of him having a phone could have hampered the reduction in his sentence. Either way, with new prison reform that's only just come out a few weeks ago, it's believed now that Sean Mercer might have to serve his whole jail sentence. The story of Rhys Jones is a tragic one, and it's a tale that will be told in the years to come. His memory will live on forever, and his name should never be forgotten. As of 2020, the tension between the two areas seems to have died down due to police going extra hard on the two gangs, and also the community was fed up with all the violence that was taking place. It seems now that the teenage gun gangs in Liverpool has shifted to areas Bootle, Kirkby and Thackeray, but that's for another story. And that is the Rhys Jones case, the 11-year-old schoolboy caught in the crossfire of a gangland shooting. But if you like this series, give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think of this in the comment section below. And if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.